Hello, everybody. Robin Williams' death has reminded the world that depression does not discriminate between the rich and famous and the rest of us, and that it is not something that people can simply snap out of. Said by Lizzie Dearden in an article in The Independent, a digital news and media journal. Mental illness is all around us, but people don't talk about it. People only started the conversation about mental health after Robin Williams' death this past summer. And it's a shame that we had to wait for a famous man to die so that we could start this conversation. I'm here to start this conversation with you guys. I'd like to discuss the paradigm shift of the changing treatments for and attitudes towards the mentally ill in America starting from the 1800s to the present day. Before I begin, I would like to talk about ancient times and treatments during those times. In ancient Egyptian and early Roman and Greek societies, they believed that mental illness was caused by physical ailments. So they would try to treat these illnesses by drilling a hole into a person's head. This process was called trephination. They treated the mentally ill like animals because they believed that they could not reason for themselves. In the early 18th century society, people believed that mental illnesses were caused by an imbalance in what was called the four humors. Once again, they thought it was a physical ailment, and they believed that if you had more of a certain humor, you would have some form of imbalance and mental illness. To treat that, they would try to purge you of one of these four humors, which basically meant either making you vomit or trying to bleed you out or something or other like that. However, people who could not afford this kind of treatment were just treated at home. In the 19th century, physicians still believed that mental illnesses were created by a problem with someone's physical nature. They believed it was a defect in the nervous system, so they tried to fix it with hydrotherapy, electric stimulation, and rest. But most of these mentally ill patients were being treated in mental asylums that were corrupt, until Dorothea Dix brought to light the horrors that were going on in these asylums. She found that mentally ill people in Massachusetts, both men and women and all ages, are incarcerated with criminals and left unclothed and in darkness and without heat or bathrooms. Many are chained and beaten. I found this in a PBS timeline, Treatments for Medical Illness, on the PBS website. Here is a quote from Dorothea Dix on her reports of asylums and prisons when she was trying to reform them. I tell you what I have seen, painful and as shocking as the details often are, that from them you may feel more deeply the imperative obligation which lies upon you to prevent the possibility of a repetition or continuance of such outrages upon humanity. If I inflict pain upon you and move you to horror, it is to acquaint you with suffering which you have the power to alleviate and make you hasten to the relief of the victims of legalized barbarity. She became a voice for the mentally ill and brought to light the horrors that were happening in the asylums. In the 20th century, although there were still some asylums and institutions, there was a rise of a more psychological approach and a more biomedical approach instead of physical. Thanks to psychologists like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, psychoanalytical therapy was developed. This was basically just a one-on-one with a psychiatrist and with a psychiatrist and a patient, just discussing what the issue was, what and all of the things that happened in the past to lead up to this issue, trying to figure out how to solve it. Meanwhile, people with more severe mental illnesses were institutionalized and treated with either meds, electroconvulsive therapy, or surgery like lobotomy and insulin-induced comas, which I also found in the PBS timeline, treatments for mental illnesses. After World War II, President Harry Truman realized that we needed to change how we were treating the mentally ill, and he wanted to do more research on it. So he instituted the Mental Health Act in 1946, a National Institute of Mental Health. He tried to create a National Institute of Mental Health to conduct research into mind, brain, and behavior, and thereby reduce mental illnesses. In the 1950s, this showed some success. There were antipsychotic drugs because of the research, and many patients were able to get the care that they deserved. However, although things were getting better, there were still some bumps in the road. In the 1960s, a man named Thomas Sands tried to create an anti-psychiatric movement. He claimed that mental illness were just myths and were used as labels to stigmatize and repress people who were slightly different. However, this wasn't true. Mental illness is very real. Today, there hasn't been much more change. There is less stigma than in the past, and now there's a more therapy and medication mix, but there are still problems. Mental illness affects every 1 in 4 people. And many people still don't believe that mental illness is real. But mental health is just as important as physical health. And it's important that we are aware of this and can understand the past to create a better future.